How did World War II sentries stop elite infiltrators they couldn't even see? They weaponized physics using nothing but taut wire and jagged glass. Today, we're layering these ancient materials to show you how a single soft footstep triggers a sonic signature so loud it makes the shadows themselves feel dangerous. Welcome to The Survival Bunker. Here, we study the brutal reality of surviving war zones, sieges, and battlefield collapse. Today, we are not examining a weapon system, a naval vessel, or a fortification built from steel and concrete. We're examining broken glass, specifically how World War II sentries on both sides of the conflict used shattered glass, taut wire, and the basic physics of gravity and friction to construct acoustic alarm systems that elite infiltrators, trained in silent movement techniques, could not reliably defeat. This is low-technology survival engineering at its most precise, and honestly, the principles behind it are as applicable in 2026 as they were in 1943. The psychology of the silent perimeter. To understand why the glass tripwire method was developed, you have to understand the specific psychological conditions of nighttime perimeter defense in the Second World War. A sentry holding a defensive line after dark in 1943 was operating in a sensory environment, stripped of its most relied-upon input. Human vision in low-light conditions degrades rapidly. The eye's cone cells, responsible for color and detail discrimination, require a minimum light threshold to function. In full darkness, with no artificial illumination, a sentry's effective visual range could be measured in feet rather than yards. Moonless nights in forested European terrain, Pacific Island jungle, or North African desert reduced visibility to near zero. A man standing 5 meters away in dark clothing was effectively invisible. The psychological consequence of this sensory deprivation was acute and well documented. Sentries in static positions in total darkness reported elevated anxiety, auditory hypersensitivity, and difficulty distinguishing genuine threat sounds from ambient environmental noise. A branch moving in wind, an animal crossing the perimeter, rain on foliage, all of these produced sounds that demanded evaluation and response from a nervous system already primed for threat detection. Extended periods of this heightened vigilance produced a documented degradation in judgment. Sentries who had been on duty for several hours in darkness were demonstrably less reliable at distinguishing genuine infiltration from environmental noise than sentries who had just begun their rotation. Both Allied and Axis forces conducting infiltration operations exploited this degradation deliberately. German Stoßtrupp raiding doctrine, refined in the First World War and carried forward into the Second, emphasized silent approach techniques, slow movement to minimize sound signature, and timing attacks for the periods of deepest darkness when sentry alertness was at its lowest point. Allied Special Operations units, including the British Special Air Service and US Army Rangers, trained extensively in silent movement across defended perimeters, understanding that the acoustic signature of an approach was the primary detection risk. The sentry's counter was to extend the perimeter's detection capability beyond his visual range using acoustic early warning systems that could function without light, without electricity, and without any technology more complex than materials available in the immediate environment. Glass was one of the most effective such materials identified through field experience across multiple theaters of the conflict. Engineering the glass harmonic. The physics that make broken glass an effective acoustic alarm material are precise and honestly worth understanding in detail. Glass fractures along irregular crystalline planes, producing shards with sharp angular edges and flat faces of varying size. Now, when those shards are disturbed, whether by contact, vibration, or displacement, they interact with each other and with any surface or wire they're in contact with, through a combination of friction and impact. The acoustic output of glass-on-glass or glass-on-wire contact is characterized by a high-frequency signature, a sharp, bright sound in the 2000 to 8000 Hz range that the human auditory system is specifically tuned to detect and localize. This frequency range actually corresponds to the range at which the human ear achieves its maximum sensitivity, a product of evolutionary selection pressure for detecting sudden environmental disturbances. The specific layering technique used in World War II perimeter defenses combined glass shards with taut wire in a configuration that maximized both the probability of contact and the acoustic output of that contact. Wire, typically scavenged communication wire, barbed wire strands, or purpose-cut lengths of any available metal filament, was strung between fixed anchor points at ankle to knee height, covering the likely approach routes to a defended position. Glass shards collected from broken bottles, windows, or any available source were suspended from or layered between these wire strands. The mechanical logic of the configuration exploited gravity as the primary trigger mechanism. An infiltrator making contact with the wire, even a light graze at slow movement speed, displaced the wire laterally. That lateral displacement transmitted a vibration along the wire's length, agitating the suspended glass shards. The shards, disturbed from their resting positions, made contact with adjacent shards and with the wire itself, producing the characteristic high-frequency acoustic signature. Critically, the vibration transmission through the wire meant that the acoustic output began before the intruder had passed through the wire line. The contact was detected at the point of the wire, and the sound propagated along the wire to glass clusters positioned at intervals along its length, producing multiple simultaneous acoustic events that were, honestly, quite difficult to attribute to a single small disturbance. The layering depth added a redundancy function. You see, a single wire strand at ankle height could be stepped over by a careful infiltrator who had detected it visually or by touch, but a layered system with wire strands at ankle, knee and mid-thigh height, each carrying glass, required an infiltrator to clear 3 independent detection lines simultaneously, a task that, honestly, in complete darkness with no reference to the wire positions, was effectively impossible without making contact with at least one strand. The glass shards' irregular edges also performed a secondary function. They were difficult to handle silently. An infiltrator who located a wire by touch and attempted to move the glass manually to clear a path could not do so without producing the same acoustic signature the system was designed to generate. The material simply resisted quiet manipulation by its physical properties. The field test infiltration. The theoretical performance of the glass tripwire system can be evaluated against documented accounts from the Second World War field use and modern acoustic analysis of the method's detection characteristics. In the Pacific Theater, United States Marine Corps defensive positions on Guadalcanal and subsequent island campaigns incorporated glass tripwire systems as standard perimeter hardening measures alongside conventional barbed wire obstacles. After-action reports from these positions document multiple instances of Japanese infiltration attempts using shinobi-eerie silent movement techniques adapted from traditional martial practice, being detected by glass perimeter alarms before the infiltrators reached the main defensive line. The detection range in these documented cases was sufficient to allow defenders to engage the approaching force before it reached effective grenade-throwing distance of the main position. The acoustic physics explain why trained silent movement techniques failed against the glass system. Modern special operations infiltration training emphasizes controlled foot placement, rolling the foot from heel to toe, distributing weight gradually to minimize pressure on vegetation or debris, and pausing after each step to listen. These techniques are frankly highly effective at reducing the acoustic signature of movement across natural terrain. They are specifically defeated by a tripwire system because the detection mechanism is not the sound of the infiltrator's footstep, it is the sound of the wire and glass responding to contact. A sound that begins before the infiltrator's foot has completed its placement, and that cannot be prevented by any variation in stepping technique once contact with the wire has occurred. High-sensitivity acoustic recording of glass tripwire contacts in controlled modern testing confirms that the sound produced by even a light graze against a properly tensioned wire carrying glass shards is detectable at distances of 15 to 25 meters under ambient quiet conditions, well beyond the visual range of a sentry in darkness. The frequency content of the sound, concentrated in the range of maximum human auditory sensitivity, means the detection threshold in terms of sound pressure level is lower than for low-frequency sounds of equivalent energy. The wire tension was the critical calibration variable. An over-tightened wire would break under light contact rather than transmitting vibration, eliminating the propagation effect along the wire length and reducing the alarm to a single localized sound from the breakpoint. An under-tightened wire would sag under the weight of the glass and produce false alarms from wind movement. Field accounts from both European and Pacific theaters describe sentries learning the correct tension calibration through experience. Tight enough to transmit vibration along the full wire length, loose enough to flex under contact rather than break. The glass tripwire system's limitations were as well understood by its users as its capabilities, and both sides of the conflict developed countermeasures and documented its failure modes under operational conditions. Weather interference was the primary reliability constraint. Rain falling on glass shards produces a continuous low-level acoustic output that masks the signature of wire contact. In sustained rainfall, a glass tripwire perimeter generated enough ambient noise that a careful infiltrator could cross it without producing a detectable signal above the rain background. Defenders operating glass perimeter systems in wet conditions understood that their detection capability was degraded and compensated by increasing sentry density and reducing the interval between patrols of the perimeter's inner boundary. Wind-driven movement of the wire and suspended glass produced false alarms at a rate that was operationally significant. In sustained wind conditions, defenders could not distinguish wire vibration caused by gusts from vibration caused by contact. Repeated false alarms, a documented problem with glass perimeter systems in exposed positions, degraded sentry response discipline over time, as defenders who had responded to multiple wind-generated signals without finding an intruder became progressively less responsive to subsequent alarms. Animal-triggered activations were a specific problem in jungle and forest environments. Small mammals, birds landing on wire, and reptiles crossing the perimeter generated acoustic signals that were indistinguishable from those produced by human contact. In the Pacific Island campaigns, where the perimeter fauna was unfamiliar to American defenders, distinguishing an animal-triggered alarm from a genuine infiltration attempt required a sentry response to every activation, a physically and psychologically exhausting requirement during extended defensive operations. Elite infiltration units on both sides developed specific counter-techniques. German Brandenburg Division operatives, trained for deep penetration missions behind Allied lines, would use wooden paddles to slowly lift wire strands from below, rather than touching them laterally, which, reduced the vibration transmitted to the glass. This technique required prior knowledge of the wire system's configuration, slow movement that extended the crossing time significantly, and, two operators working in coordination. It was not consistently effective against multi-layer systems where the spacing between wire strands made simultaneous paddle manipulation of all layers impossible. The comparison to modern sensor technology really clarifies the glass method's position in the surveillance spectrum. Contemporary perimeter security in 2026 uses ground-based seismic sensors that detect footstep vibrations transmitted through soil, passive infrared detectors that identify body heat signatures, acoustic sensors with digital signal processing that filters environmental noise, and identifies human movement patterns, and millimeter wave radar systems that detect motion through vegetation. Each of these systems offers detection capabilities that the glass tripwire simply cannot match under adverse conditions. But, each of them also requires power, electronic components, maintenance and supply chains that the glass tripwire does not. In a grid-down environment, in a field-expedient defensive position with no electronic infrastructure, the glass tripwire performs a detection function that no amount of digital sensor technology can replicate without electricity. The glass tripwire system's survival as a relevant technique across 80 years of sensor technology development reflects a principle that appears, pretty consistently across the history of survival engineering. Analog solutions that exploit fundamental physics remain functional, no matter what the technological environment around them looks like. The method's current relevance, actually extends beyond just military applications. Emergency preparedness and off-grid security communities have documented the glass tripwire as a viable perimeter alarm for situations where electronic sensors are unavailable, impractical, or compromised by power failure. The materials requirement, wire of any type, glass from any broken container, is achievable in virtually any environment where human habitation has occurred. The technical knowledge required to deploy it effectively can be transmitted in a single practical session. Modern survival and preparedness instructors teaching low-technology security methods consistently identify the glass tripwire as one of a small number of historical military techniques whose performance-to-resource ratio honestly justifies its continued inclusion in current training. The acoustic physics have not changed. Glass still produces a high-frequency signature that's detectable at useful distances. The human auditory system still achieves maximum sensitivity in the frequency range that glass contact generates. The geometry of a taut wire carrying suspended glass still converts light lateral contact into a multi-point acoustic event before the infiltrator completes their crossing. The World War II sentries who developed and refined this technique through field experience across multiple theaters were solving a specific problem with available materials under operational time pressure. They did not have access to acoustic analysis equipment or frequency response data. They had darkness, a defended perimeter, and the documented experience of what happened when that perimeter was crossed silently. The glass tripwire was their answer to a physics problem they understood instinctively rather than analytically. The answer was correct. The physics confirmed it then. They confirm it now. The glass tripwire is not a primitive technique that was replaced by better technology. It is a physics-based detection system that exploits properties of material and human sensory biology that have not changed and, frankly, cannot be changed. Better technology can complement it. Nothing that requires electricity can replace it when the electricity is gone. The sentries who learned this in the dark on Guadalcanal and in the forests of occupied Europe understood something that remains true. The most effective alarm is the one that works when everything else has failed. If this briefing changed how you think about low-technology security and the physics of acoustic detection, subscribe to the Survival Bunker and share this video. Every share puts this research in front of someone who takes preparedness and military history seriously. Hit the notification bell and we will see you at the next briefing.